even more. So I would like to ask you here in this room, who of us is a native English speaker? 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4. Who of us is a native English speaker?
English.
Native
English.
Native English.
So we have 4, 5.
It's a very strong term. I've been speaking English all my life, but I'm not native English.
I've been speaking English not all my life, but most of the years of my life, and I'm not an English speaker person. My mother tongue is Spanish. So see the room, we must have like 50 people, approx, and we have less than 10% of native English speakers, but we are using English as our common language for working, which is fine. We all accept this. But this is a big barrier for many people. Many of us live in developing countries. I can tell you in Latin America, if someone says, I do speak English, well, that may mean for many people that they can read, that they can perhaps write at a certain pace, but perhaps if a native speaker speaks quite fast, maybe they cannot follow. And maybe they have some difficulties in participating, speaking in a dialogue, speaking in a workshop like this, speaking in a conference. So that is a big limitation. And also think about the content that we generate about internet governance. It has its complexity. It is related with policy. Sometimes it's related with technology terms, technology issues. And if you really are not into the language, that may mean a very important barrier. So for some of us that do care about diversity in the internet, we think that the language and the content in other language, relevant content in other languages, quality content in other languages is a relevant issue for a real inclusive and diverse internet governance ecosystem. Some of us here in the room have been working, I don't know all of you, but apart from our speakers, I know some of you, and I know that some of us have this as a main concern. I personally am involved in several capacity building activities focused in Latin America, which is the region that I come from. And we do have our training programs with simultaneous translation. We do produce a lot of content in other languages, so we let our colleagues from Latin America having more tools for a relevant inclusiveness. And talking about this, I would like to address some questions to our panelists. Also think about high quality. Sometimes the content and I'm thinking about a website that I usually go and check, and the content, the relevant content, it's in English. And sometimes when you try to find the same content in other languages, it's not that much, or it's reduced, or it doesn't even exist. So how can we improve that? What can we do to improve that? How can we give some steps towards that? I can tell you that I've been worried about this for many years, and many people tell me, not now, but years ago, they came and tell me, hey, but you do speak English well. What is your problem? Well, it's not my problem. It's the problem of many other colleagues from myself, from Argentina and Latin America, that they don't speak English. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity to learn the language the way I did, or maybe you don't have the gift. That sometimes it's an issue of being more adaptive to one language to others. So I'm worried because I want all my people to have the same access to the knowledge I have. So, for example, one example is ICANN. When I started participating in ICANN in 2006 was my first meeting. All the meetings were in English. When I started to request for translation, they told me that I was totally crazy and that it was very expensive. But now ICANN has simultaneous translation in most of the sessions in 6 languages from United Nations plus Portuguese, which is, I think, is remarkable. And I always commend the organization for having done that effort, and also the documents that they produce are also mainly translated into these languages. Also, I have recently published a call for applications for I'm a member of the board of ISOC, and we are seeking for new members for next year. So I insisted and I translated the call for applications into Spanish and French, because apart from English, I thought it was good for other colleagues to have that information in other languages. So we don't have to lose the hope. We always have to insist. And now there are many tools that also help our work in translating and generating this content. So having said all this introduction, I will stop talking because our colleagues have many other ideas to share with us. And I will ask to our dear panelists one question. Then I will ask them to talk about 3 minutes, approx. And then we will open the floor for comments, and then we have another question for our panelists. And the first question is, how can we improve the diversity of Internet governance to promote an inclusive ecosystem of this Internet that we all like and dare? So how can I start?
So we can, yeah.
You can present your colleagues.
Yes, my name is Delilah Ramouni. I'm from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I am the French GAC representative. So today we raise a very important question about the diversity and, in general, how can we put some balances in the multi-stakeholder model. So for that, we have raised first question. So let me, sorry, it is also for me a little bit difficult. Sorry. So Emmanuel Adjovi is a specialist of policy and cyber law. He is the head of information society at the International Organization of La Francophonie. And he is mainly responsible for internet governance, cybersecurity, and digital economy. He is the International Organization of La Francophonie GAC representative, and he is a visiting professor as Telecom Paritech. This is the floor.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Dalila. I'm going to start by introducing my organization, International Organization of Francophonie. It is an intergovernmental organization with 84 state members. We have 58 full members and 26 observers. The first job of our organization is to promote diversity, linguistic and cultural diversity. This is the first job of our organization. How can we improve internet governance content? The main action which must be laid to improve internet governance content should be to rebalance the power in internet governance. The first step can be to develop diversity indicators, implement national strategy and develop a diversity of internet, establish a body of observatory to measure the diversity of the decision-making bodies and monitor its development. This is important because diversity is a way to establish, to set up peace, to organize the inclusive participation, attending of internet governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for the 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good. So we have more time for discussion.
Yeah. And the second contributor is Charlie Berthet. Is a lawyer working as chief officer of legal and institutional affairs at the French Digital Council. He is specialized in the matter of digital rights, and he is currently rapporteur for the French parliamentary mission on artificial intelligence.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Just to answer your question, I'm not a native English speaker, and my English is quite rusty because I don't practice it too often.
So the same thing for me.
So please excuse.
The problem is that.
Please excuse this. I should start also by presenting my institution because I think it's a good illustration of how diversity can be put at the service of, in our case, public policy, policies elaboration. So, well, the French Digital Council is an independent advisory commission. It gathers 30 volunteers, all appointed by the French prime ministers, entrepreneurs for the first third, academics for the second third, and representatives of the civil society, activists, thinkers, you name it, for the third. They're all appointed by the French prime ministers for their digital expertise, but not only. There's always some members who don't strictly come from the digital world. We've had artists, we've had farmers. The reason is simple, because we need to think a digital society that's made for everyone, not just the happy few. So the Council is committed to one major purpose: to help the government elaborate, shape and implement digital public policies. And I guess it is worth noting that for the first time in 5 years of existence, the chairperson of the Council was actually going to be a woman. It's always been gender equal, but we've had Marie Clande as the chairperson, as the chairwoman. So this is quite a good sign for diversity. And our role is really to capitalize on this wide diversity in order to identify problems, issues that needs to be addressed, and to propose innovative solutions to tackle them. But apart from this mission, the Council is really meant to be an interface between the government and the digital society at large. We like to consider ourselves as a public lobby, a lobby for those who don't have one, the citizens, the SMEs, the startups who don't have the time, the money to assert their interests in front of public authorities. Just so for regarding digital inclusion, we believe that the internet has changed. Like you said, when ICANN was, for example, we can take ICANN as an example. When ICANN was created 20 years ago, 75% of the internet users live in developed countries, and mostly in North America and Europe. Nowadays, more than 66% of internet users live in developing countries, and the numbers keep growing. By 2030, we expect that an overwhelming majority of users will access the internet from Asia, Africa, Latin America, most of them being non-native English speakers. Yet, today the governance model does not quite reflect this diversity. We know that because the figures are public, 40% of ICANN community leaders come from North America. More than 60% are native English speakers, and women only represent 26% of community leaders. It's impossible to ignore the evolution of the internet users. This internet community has changed, it will change again, and it's happening very, very fast. So for ICANN, for example, we know that things are moving, things are changing, but do they, and the governance in general, the governance structure of the internet in general, do things really keep pace with this rapidly changing context? This is why we deeply favor the proposal, for example, for the creation of an office for diversity and inclusion within ICANN, which would gather and analyze data regarding diversity and could make, for example, concrete proposals to effectively enhance diversity within ICANN.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you very much.
Olga?
Okay. I will go to my left. Caterine. Caterine, she is from Peru, so her mother tongue is Spanish, and I guess that she speaks also, how do you say, Netherlands or Dutch. And English, and perhaps other languages. So she is also a very multilingual person, but she can bring us her perspective, especially being an academic and producing content all the time about this issue. So welcome to our workshop.
Thank you, Olga. You forgot to mention, I'm also visiting professor at the South School of Internet Governance, and that's actually a great venue to meet different students from the Americas and the world that attend our school. And of course, being based in The Hague, I'm based in the Netherlands, I also had the chance to meet, at The Hague University, for instance, we have students from 25 different nationalities. I am currently teaching different courses in concerns to internet governance, so cybersecurity, privacy, and technology information technology. I noticed that one of the main challenges is to try to, in order to make the knowledge sharing more closer to the students, these international students, is always to be able to translate it and make it closer to the reality. So I always use case studies, and I always use case law of their countries of origin. And I think whenever you use case law that concerns to the country of origin of our students, already is a first step towards connecting the content with your own reality. So what I want to make, the point I want to make here is a point of connection. So how do we connect content with the target group? And so then my first best practice to share here will be always to use case studies in which, and case law in which the students are familiar with, because whether are courses concerning constitutional law that has already been dealing with cybersecurity issues or privacy issues, or even the right to be forgotten that is now, for instance, well discussed in Latin America. Different constitutional courts have already given a resolution or decision on cases dealing with the right to be forgotten, for instance. So if you make that connection, you are able to reach out and to do a strong capacity building. And that's my second point. I think, how do we start, whenever somebody asks me, so what do you do at the university? And I think if we think of us, professors and academics, as capacity builder agents, I think that's also a very good way to acknowledge that that's our role, that we are there not only for teaching courses, but also to make those connections I mentioned first. And from time to time, of course, in my courses, I also use, originally for lawyers, we use a lot of Latin terminology, because many of the case law, for instance, due process and everything that has to do with criminal law is still very much related with Latin roots. So I also try to use that in order to socialize it with the students, and I ask them, so how do you know this institution in your own language? So then, once again, making connections besides case law, besides case studies, so trying to look for the connections in their own language of the students. And I think that has been so far very successful in my in the seminars I'm involved. And I think all in all is very much about this work of capacity building that we do from the academia. We have a very important role there. And also, of course, to have all, at least when you write articles, to try to at least have the abstracts also written in 2 languages in order to reach out the target audience that you are trying to reach. And I think that those will be my recommendations so far. So connecting, using case law, case studies of the country of origin, and all the wording that is spread there is related to the reality and the context of the target audience. And I think that cannot be more beneficial for them as well.
Thank you very much, Katerina. And it comes to my mind an anecdote I want to share with you. When we organized the School of Internet Governance in Washington, D.C., in the Organization of American States, there were students from the United States or English speakers. There were students from Latin America, and there were many from Brazil. So instantly, when they knew each other, there were 3 WhatsApp groups. Instantly, they were created, one in Spanish, one in Portuguese, one in English. That was just spontaneous, and they gathered together because of their language skills very, very quickly. So thank you for your comments. And Claudio, can you share you're a very good Spanish speaker. By the way, you don't speak Spanish, you speak Argentinian, which is nice.
You've been holding these sessions for so long that my accent is the closest that it gets to yours. So, Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Olga. But this is, by the way, the second time we were in a similar discussion, bringing best practices in the second IGF in a row. So I'm really thankful for the opportunity of being here. I would like to echo Catherine in highlighting the importance of initiatives like the South School of Internet Governance, which is the place where I had a contact to leave a little bit more of the Brazilian reality and to delve a little bit more into a Latin American reality, sharing experiences with Latin American friends, identifying common problems, identifying things that we could transpose from one country to the other, and it's due to this terrific work by Olga and Adrian, which you can certainly see in other sessions too, that I have been given this opportunity. Brazil is a country of 207 million inhabitants, and we are around 350 million Portuguese speakers around the world. So in Brazil, it's not very easy, and it's not very easy to convince people to try to explore another language. It's usually enough to speak to the 207 millions that you have as your neighbors. Yet, I believe you can see in the last years in international events and in the IGF a growing presence of resilience, and here, and this year we have around 30 young people selected by different institutions who are sent here exactly to mingle, to interact, to explore that. So I think that's best practice number one, invest in the young people who are going to look at the future. I remember having mentioned that, and I think this is a very interesting thing to highlight in a forum like that. When I happened to be in the post of Dean of the Law Faculty in my school for 2 years, and we had a program called Science Without Borders, which offers Brazilian students an opportunity to study abroad, fully funded opportunity to study abroad. We did fill all the positions to Portugal. We did fill all the positions to Spanish-speaking countries, but out of 20 to 21 positions for English-speaking countries, we returned 19 of them. So it's, of course, we have to think that the inbound language issues of producing content in your own language, and we are working on that. But also this interaction has to be promoted. It doesn't happen, it's not streamlined if we don't deploy initiatives like the capacity building initiatives we're talking about here. I haven't, the relevance of the content that Olga mentioned in the beginning is very interesting. It's cruel also that, for example, I haven't been written, I think, a full paper in Portuguese. I haven't written a full paper in Portuguese in 4 years or so. I have written blog posts, smaller reports, executive summaries, but not full papers for the last 4 years. This is cruel. Because I'm depriving the ones who are essentially funding my research and my work from that output. This is not the right output, but yet there is the outreach and there is the relevance of the publication that in the academic world we are forced to gauge in this environment, and that is a cruel outcome that we are forced to live with. I'll leave it here for the time being, but I'm sure we have another opportunity to interact. Thanks, Olga.
Thank you, Claudia. And it's interesting what you mentioned. I also write most of the things in English.
Sure.
Why? Because the way that you can reach more people is to write in English. It's cruel, but if you write in Spanish, then someone comes and says, why don't you translate it? Could be good to have it in English, because then we can spread it in more widely. So I didn't think about it. Thanks for bringing this up. Very interesting. Next speaker is Jennifer. You want to say something, Jennifer, or Dustin? Jennifer, go ahead. Jennifer is from a very interesting organization. It's .Asia. I would like to stress the fact that .Asia was the first organization I can remember that brought young people to the IGF. Is that right? Yes, because now there are many programs. All of them are fantastic, and I really like them. I also like to promote young participants. And they did that in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, and for me it was, and I told Edmond at that time, I said, this is very good. And they were the first one. Now there is a program from Internet Society, program from Fellowship in ICANN, and also there are other, and the youth program from, I think it's ISOP that has the youth program. But you were really pioneering that idea of bringing young people that Claudio has just stressed as a major change. So let us know what you think. And also, you have another challenge, because your mother tongue must be Chinese. So then you have the challenge of the script. It's not only the language, but also it's written in a different script. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Olga, for that very kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Chung. Like Olga did introduce, I do work for an organization called .Asia. We are the sponsoring and registry operator for the top-level domain .Asia. And being a nonprofit organization, as Olga already mentioned, we actually have a lot of community works and initiatives where we do try to promote adoption of the internet across Asia Pacific. One of the really flagship programs that we have is the youth program. We did bring a lot of young delegates to IGF since Sharm el-Sheikh, and we have continued to do so, also to forums like ICANN, IETF as well. What we really want to stress, and I want to echo my colleague Claudio here, is investing in young people is very important. When you think about it, the next billion coming online, their native tongue is not English. My native tongue is also not English, so it's really difficult to get people aware of the possibilities and opportunities to participate in something like internet governance, for them to be aware of it in the first place. And then the second place is for them to learn the processes in a language that's not their own is even more difficult, as I think even English speakers, native English speakers, find this topic kind of esoteric, kind of niche, or kind of something that they don't think about in everyday life. So I think three points I'd like to put forward in our, I guess, learning through youth capacity building. The content needs to be in a simple language. It needs to be in language that lay people understand. It needs to be in a language that's local, of course, because when you have translation, you lose the nuance of what makes each language special, the characteristics of that language. And then thirdly, it's got to be tailored to the target audience. When you're talking to young people, you need to be at their level and speak their language. When you're talking to perhaps young professionals, it will be a different sort of way to engage them. And of course, when you're talking to people already working, government officials and IGOs, that's yet another way of tailoring that language to include them into this conversation. So maybe I'll just leave it here and give it back to Olga. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And you bring to another anecdote I want to share with you. I participate in many calls with native English speakers, and they usually, what I beg to them is not to use very, how can I say that in English? Expresiones locales, local expressions, or very local, because I don't know them. And also you may come from Australia, from England, from United States. United States is a huge country, so many different languages, accents, special words. So what I do, every time they use these special words that I cannot understand, I ask, what is that? And of course I can go and Google that. That's very easy now, but I don't do it, and I do that on purpose. And I immediately say, oh, I'm sorry, that means blah, blah, blah. And I usually share the way that I say that in Spanish. And I usually tell them, well, if you're learning in Spanish, I will put you in the position of, I will talk like I talk with my friends in Buenos Aires very quickly with all the Spanish we use in Argentina, which is a little bit different. And you will have a challenge moment because you won't follow me. And immediately people realize that. So we also, I think you made a very good point, try to make it in a plain language without local expressions, whichever the language you're using, and try to be in a simple way, explain right to the point. I think that's a very good point. Dustin, you're a native English speaker. Tell us your experience. Oh, by the way, let me tell you, Dustin and Jackie, you want to say something, Jackie? No. Jackie and Dustin work a very interesting project, which is called ICANN-Wiki. You can go to the website and see it. It has content in English, and some of us are contributing with translations into Spanish, Swahili, help me, Portuguese, Russian, Chinese, and well, you will say that. But they do something also very, very nice, which is not only words. They do, ¿cómo se dice en inglés? Caricatura. ¿Cómo se dice caricatura? Cartoons. Very nice cartoons. So if you go to their booth, or if you go to the booth that they usually have in here or in ICANN meetings, they will take a picture of you and they will do a very, very nice cartoon. So that's another type of language. That's a visual language, which says a lot, not only words, but images. So Dustin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Olga. And what you mentioned about the cartoons that we produce is actually an important aspect of making internet governance more diverse. I had a lot of other things I could have talked about, but I've been on this panel with Claudio and Jen several times, so they already stole everything else that I had to say. But it's having a sense of community, and there are different ways in which we can build community, but it can be hard to enter a community where it's largely driven by native English speakers using their slang terms that others may not understand. So providing a resource that is accessible but also builds community. That's what we try to do at ICANN-Wiki. The premise of the project is similar to Wikipedia, where we build all of our content collaboratively through the community, and we encourage this content development through fun giveaways and fun incentives, such as the caricatures. And then if you come to an ICANN meeting, you stop by our booth, you can contribute content that others will find useful. You can get your cartoon printed off, and then maybe later down the road at the conference, you have something to break the ice with, because you both have this cartoon, and maybe you don't have other relatable experiences. So just providing fun, innovative ways to build and drive community. There are certainly other ways in which we can do this, but we truly believe in, when you're onboarding new people and bringing in newcomers, that you really need to provide them with a sense of community and show them that their work and their contribution is valued within the community. Because if they feel like an outsider and they don't feel like their work is being appreciated, then it's less likely that they're going to continue to return and develop their skills to a point where they are contributing meaningfully.
What's your feeling? How long have you been working for the project, and how do you feel this translation into the content into other languages is evolved? How do you feel it from the side that most of the content was in English and it's evolving towards other languages?
Right. So both Jackie and I have been working on the project for 2.5, 3 years. When we started, we had a handful of language articles in Spanish and Chinese, but really not anything substantive. So we had 6,000 articles in English, and we approached the translation in different ways. We had organizational partnerships where we would have in-kind translations, which is great. It's important to get that content out there, but what we found more effective and engaging is to reach out to locals in each region and develop small regional communities that work together to develop content and translate content that's not only in their language but also locally relevant. So by having the initiatives driven by local stakeholders, they're able to determine which content will be more valuable for their community, whereas if Jackie and I were to sit in our office and say, oh, we think these 100 articles are relevant, and then go pay to have them translated, it's great that the content will be available in other languages, but it might not be the most relevant content for them. And another aspect of this, in addition to translating it and making it relevant, is making it easy to find. Because there's a lot of content out there about internet governance, but it's hard to find it. So somebody may be interested in cybersecurity, and they may not realize that 30 minutes away there's an event in their region, in their language, happening that would be of interest to them. And they may not realize that there are several organizations in their region working on issues that they care about that they could get involved with. So it's a holistic approach where you need to have it content available in a local language that is relevant and accessible and easy to find.
Thank you, Dustin. I think this relates with what Catherine was saying in when working with students or young people, or not young, but with people in a community, bringing the content towards their interest, because that will make much more into their interest.
Relate to the context.
Exactly.
Olga, if you allow me,
sure.
I'd like to add that as for this year, actually I invited, Dustin was around The Hague area, so I said, come on, I'm teaching civil and political rights for already 4 years in a row. And since this year, I actually started an internet governance hub within my course. And so I took the chance that Dustin was in The Hague for that time, and we actually hosted an internet governance hub with my students on one of my courses. And it was, I think, quite successful because we also have a representative of the IGF participating. And so they got that sense of, I want to also highlight the sense of community that comes in creating a hub within any course that can be related or linked to internet governance. And so they had the challenge to present themselves on topics. So we kind of had the same format that we have here at the UN IGF. And it was, I think, a very good experience. And I think so far we managed to create that sense of community too by creating and having an internet governance hub in one of my courses. And so we're going to follow this tradition every year now. So then I will, of course, share later on when this happened, and usually if you want to collaborate with us in these internet governance hubs that we have at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, then contact me, please.
I will give the floor to my dear colleague Delilah to address questions from the audience.
Now the floor is yours. Do you have some questions? Comments?
Experiences to share?
Yeah?
Anecdotes?
Yes?
If you can tell your name.
Yeah, and introduce you.
Olga Kirilyuk, NGO Digital Defenders Partners Ukraine. I just wanted to say that I believe these discussions to be very important because basically language is the precondition for the meaningful engagement, and if you don't speak the same language with the people with whom you are trying to work on the same initiatives, that basically creates a lot of problems. Like, for example, For us, we currently have the Internet Freedom Network for Southeastern Europe and Eurasia, and whenever we have some kind of the regional gathering, it creates the problem of the understanding, because the speakers we normally invite, they are coming from they are either native English speakers or the people who use English like on the daily basis, and they are very fine with this language. But then people who are coming from this region, mostly they are either Russian speaking, or like Russian can be the common language for them, or they are using their national languages, and this is a bit difficult for them to understand, because even there is the simultaneous translation provided, sometimes the very concepts are lost, and then is this what you meant, and then not really, and it takes time. It is very time consuming to explain what are the concepts. And I also wanted to relate to the example which was already brought up about the articles and papers we write, because honestly I hated to write all these short summaries in other languages, but then during one of the discussions with my colleagues from abroad, they said, but this is basically the only way for some people to find some papers on this topic at all. And then I understood that probably all the time that you are spending on this, making short summaries, it's not really wasted, because for somebody this can be the way to find that something is written on this topic, and somehow to even you see, you can use then the Google Translator for the whole contents. And then also I was for some time teaching the courses on ICT for development and internet governance. We had the mixed groups of people, because this was the English-speaking course, and then we had people from abroad and Ukrainians in one group. And then when you need to explain the very concept of what is internet governance, but people even don't get all the terminology in English. So you come back to your own language, explaining what this means, and then just trying to explain the concept itself. So it's really very important to discuss these issues and to bring them to this kind of meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, let me tell you that your English is very good, and it was difficult, very quick. It was difficult for me to follow you.
So, first of all, the man here, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me congratulate you for organizing this session. I am Cissé Khan from Senegal. I represent the African Civil Society on the Information Society. It's a platform of 500 NGOs across the continent and the diaspora. And we really believe that if there is one failure from the VCs, it is the one of digital linguistic diversity. And it's a paradox, because internet should have been a mean for us to understand each other, because we can send mails very quickly, we can also put on the web. But what we see is that digital, the diversity is not going at the same speed that the internet. And we in Africa, we are confronted really with the issue of language, because if you look at the IGF itself, if you look at the call for proposals and all these things, everything is English. Last year, for example, I won it also at the VCS forum. And the VCS prize is in English if you want to apply. If you don't have your project in English, you are out. And it's a problem. And I don't know where we can solve it and who will solve it. But it's really a big issue. And for example, I'm trying to get my website in French and English. If you go in Africa, we have 4 official languages, or 5. And we have African languages. And how can we make internet governance digest for the population? It's a huge market, but all these people are out of the process because they don't speak English. And I'm just launching this call. I'm just joining my voice to yours to tell that it's an issue that is unsolved, and no one wants to solve it. And business is making business. It's normal. We understand, but in fact, we started 25 years ago at the same levels, 0. Internet connection, 0 access to internet. But now some are at 80%, some are at 20%. If you look at Africa, we are really left behind. And we are trying to, for example, translate everything, courses and curriculums in Arabic, in French, and in Portuguese. We are not talking about African languages. And it's a huge issue. And we are really, if there is any initiative in this side, it's really welcome, because I think it is the most important digital gap. It's not literacy, it's how we can consume what is produced in the internet. And as a leader of African NGOs, I can tell you what is produced is not digested by people. I'm not talking about the Africans who are not have been at school, but even the civil servants, they don't understand. And I'm just asking, what are the solutions? Thank you very much.
One comment. I think one challenge we can add to our conversation is that there are countries with several languages. Some are official and some are not. I come from a region that we are lucky. We speak the same language almost in all the countries. Latin America, and Portuguese is a close language to Spanish. We can speak Portuñol, which is something in between. But I see in Asia and in Africa countries that in the same country you have many, many different languages and dialects. So that adds a new dimension. Sorry, I interrupted you. You want to add something?
If at least we can ensure that the official languages are taken into account in the global forums, it will be a good move. But this is not the case. Even for VC's prize or for applying just to have a paper at Internet Governance Forum, for example, if you don't speak English, you are out. Yep. It's a reality.
In this area, I think that it is important to develop IDN in Africa and local content in the regional language, because in Africa we have 2,000 languages, and then we can develop IDN in the regional languages, like such as Swahili, Lingala, Mandingo, Yoruba, and so on. I think it's the way to solve this problem.
We have a queue. Let me give the floor to our. 1 second. Let me establish the queue. You're first. Okay. You after Jonathan. Wait a minute. There was you and Jonathan. Is that okay? I'm missing someone? No. Please go ahead. And thank you for such a vivid participation.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Dong-Gil Lee. I'm from South Korea, and I just want to share some experience as a youth in this room. So my first time to get engaged with the internet governance was ICANN meeting. So before that, actually, even though Korea is one of the first leading countries for the internet, but we don't know about the internet governance at all. But after participating in the youth programs like NextGen and ICANN or the other program, and I think I can't meet the other young people from all over the world who had an interest in the internet governance things. So I think there is a potential things when the young generation meet together, because I think mostly right now in the internet governance field, the people are a little bit younger, older than the young generations. But once we get gathered together, I think we have a fresh idea. So, for example, recently in South Korea, we have also the language problems as well. Even though the mother tongue is a Korean, but partially we also use the Chinese. So for the Chinese characters, some countries are used for the official language, such as mainland of China, Hong Kong, and Japan, and even South Korea. So even though there are a lot of the conflicts, but when the young generation gather together, and then we can figure out better solutions, because we don't know about the very complicated background. So this is my point that youth program is really helpful. For this time, I'm here at IGF with the fellowship from the Korean government, the agency named Korean Internet and Security Agency. It means the Korean government also, they realize the needs that the young generation needed for the next generation of the internet. So even though, so this is my wish that, if you find out some young people in the IGF or the other internet meetings, please encourage them to participate more and more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, hi. My name is Saliu Mansare. I'm from Sierra Leone. The issue of the digital divide, I think it's going to stay with us for a while. There's going to be a certain number, and that ceiling will stop there until the content is localized. What I agree with Mr. Ajuvi is that we need to localize the development. For example, what some groups in some of my villages have done is they've adapted WhatsApp. They cannot write, but they know how to press the video, they know how to press the audio. So they have their own groups, but they're sending messages by video and audio. And they're now starting to use certain symbols that they've generated to indicate certain items, because they're mostly farmers and they needed to send messages back and forth. So they're not using English, not any other language, and they're just doing video and audio, and they have symbols that they've now adapted. I wouldn't want to share some of those videos, symbols anyway, but it's one way. We have to localize it, and that's the only way. Otherwise, these 5 big languages are not going to solve the problem.
Thank you very much. And now can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Diógenes Laertius. I come from Brazil. I make a part of a CGI program, Youth. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for Mr. Lucena for introducing the growth of Youth Brazilian participation. The CGI-BR is doing a great job providing opportunity for youth go to events since 2015 with a partnership with Internet Society as a Youth at IGF program. I'm here thanks to a scholarship provided by them, TGI in this case. Continuing, I'd like to highlight the job of Youth Observatory, a special interest group from ISOC that make a party. It's composed for all by youths and for youth people in the scenario of inclusion for everyone, each part of the globe. We began with youth from regions of Latin America and Caribbean, and now we have youth from several parts of the world. During the year, we propose different events in each part of countries, and offers scholarship for youth to go there and participate actively in the governance environment system with a youth perspective. All the content available by us and in our website is translated for each idiom that we use, like English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Yes. Okay, so continuing, I'd like to highlight the importance of Icon Week initiative for Portuguese language, because today we have, in Brazil, we have initiatives like the IRIS Institute, Artigo 19, that are doing a great job translate content and create content for us. But because some is grow up at the time that we make more actively participant on this environment. So my question is for Justin, is more technical, because I'm contribute for Iconic in Portuguese version. So it's more technical, but it's not clear for me how the Iconic control, quality control works for each language, because the community works very well, but there is a yes, the content grow very much. So we have the community that speak only language that speaks each language, okay. But how this works very good. How this works. And the idea of the draws is very interesting. I like so much. It's very fun. And maybe I will get one of mine. This is all. Thank you.
Well, yes, we would love to get you a caricature, first of all. Secondly, I think there are two ways to answer this question. I think I'm going to answer it from a general perspective of quality control, and then I'm actually going to hand it over to Claudio because he's been involved in our Portuguese translation initiative. And like I mentioned, we truly give the local communities the autonomy over that content creation as long as they follow our primary guidelines, which are that the content needs to be factual, it needs to be written from a neutral perspective, and it needs to be well referenced and related to internet governance in some meaningful way. So as long as our contributors operate in good faith and follow these basic principles, then we don't curate very much at all. We step in when somebody clearly violates our terms. And in terms of providing the kind of quality control in the different language sites, to control for different types of Portuguese or different scripts of Chinese, we're not experts on that, so it's better to delegate that to the local communities. And when we had our edit-a-thon in Copenhagen, it was really cool to see the Portuguese-speaking community that we had there kind of break off into their own group and discuss how they were going to handle the standards of the Portuguese language. And so maybe Claudio can speak on that a little bit more.
May I just...
Yes, we have Jonathan in the queue, okay. But you go ahead and then we give the floor to you.
I'll stick to this topic here. Yeah. In Copenhagen, I think it was my second or third contact already with ICANN Wiki, and we started looking at different interesting aspects. For example, Portuguese in Portugal and Portuguese in Brazil are not exactly the same, and the other countries in the community of language of Portuguese speaking countries. It's very different. The term internet governance itself is governança de internet in Brazil, e governação de internet, as it is said in Portugal. So we started looking at this from a linguistic perspective, although we are not specialists. Started trying some curation, at least in the beginning of the project. It's evidently going to be released and flow much more easier when we have those standards. And this thing happens to, for example, to all ICANN constituencies. Each translation is very delicate. So once we have a fixed structure, I think we can go easily with that.
Now I want to give the floor to Jonathan. Sorry I kept you waiting, but there was some dialogue in the room. Welcome.
Of course, thank you. My name is Jonathan Zook, and I'm from the Innovators Network Foundation. And I guess I want to say something a little bit controversial, and that is that language may not be at the core of lack of understanding about internet governance, because if you look at English-speaking countries, it's a very small minority of people that know anything about what's going on in internet governance, even though they could read all the documents if they wanted to. And so it may have more to do with the channels of communication. In other words, the people that are reading the documents in English-speaking languages, those analogous people in other countries very often do speak a second language, French or English or something like that, but because of cultural differences in terms of where people go to get their information, whether it's radio or television or groups, etc., like user groups and things like that, means that the information isn't coming to them, and that's a bigger problem, in fact, than their inability to read it once they see it. Just something to think about.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Any comments? You want to add something, Claudio?
Sorry.
I would like to say to Dustin that we need French wiki. ICANN wiki.
Yes, of course. And the volume, you can increase the volume.
So we have to move to the second question.
Yes, the second. You want to present the second part? You and me? Okay. Second question, and thanks, Jonathan, for bringing controversy to the dialogue. That's the idea, to shake us a little bit. It's about. Let me find it. I've written so many notes. Wait. how can the different stakeholders contribute to the internet governance model and the content? And before moving to our panelists to give some comments, let me say that I have made a big mistake in forgetting some important languages in Latin America, which are the pre-Colombinos, how do you say that? Colombian languages, which are from the communities that still live in our region, which are many, and their languages are, thanks to the internet, they're having now a space where they can develop and their communities can live in there. So Aymara, Quechua, many others that I'm not so much familiar with that, but I made a big mistake in forgetting them because they are part of our language diversity and culture in Latin America, and of course the same must happen in other regions in the world. And so how the different stakeholders can contribute. We have heard something from the academia, and I was wondering if our colleagues who are expert in French can give us some insight how more content in French can be developed, especially from the experience of your organizations.
Firstly, I want to say that today internet governance is multi-level governance. It is not yet multi-stakeholder system. When one goes out of the ideological atmosphere, one can see that the experience of the multi-stakeholder model are not yet conclusive. In many countries, at the national level, business and civil society representatives are not involved in internet governance. At the international level, particularly at ICANN, government and civil society have a marginal role in internet governance. It is necessary to leave this multi-stakeholder system of testimony or facade. We need to have inclusive and democratic internet governance. For this, it is important to highlight capacity building. This is a very important point. Another point from my experience is the IT developer training. And we need to set up the strategy, the national strategy, to empower people to interact in internet governance. I think this is an important way. I want to leave and give the floor to another people.
Sorry, I'm writing. You made a very, very interesting point. It's empower. How? Because sometimes you provide the content, but that's not enough. You need someone that perhaps chairs you and helps you diving into the content and finding what Catherine was saying, your interest into that content, because maybe it's too general, but you can always find an interest in the content. But that needs some experience from other colleagues that are in the... I always try to do that with my students and with my colleagues in Latin America and help them guiding through the different contents, but trying to focus on their interest. Who wants to follow?
Yeah. Now probably the experience of the French Digital Council.
Yes. Well, just to emphasize that while inclusiveness is not just a nice-to-have feature, it's really a democratic requirement, especially for internet governance. It's critical in determining the future path of the network. It has major consequences on the global economic balance, on the digital rights and liberties of the people, and in shaping really the contours of the digital society. And to put it differently, the stakes are too high just to, it affects everyone's life, and it's too important to be just handled by geeks, really. So, yet the facts are, very few people know about what's going on at ICANN, at IGF, at W3C. Like it's been mentioned, if you ask any French business or association, the vast majority won't know what's going on in this organization. Many don't even know they exist. And the costs of entry into these debates are extremely high for the reasons we've mentioned. At the Council, we've laid out 3 proposals broad proposals to reach the public. So first, we need to think of ways to enable the people's meaningful participation once they arrive in these governance organizations. So we've talked about training and capacity building. Second, we need to create a framework that allows these organizations to find those people in order for the people to know about those organizations. How can these organizations proactively find the people affected by internet governance? And third, it's been mentioned, we need to think of channels of communications in order to reach a larger public and not only the happy few.
Okay. So thank you very much, Charlie. Any observation? Yes?
Thank you very much once again for the opportunity. I would like to draw upon 2 very insightful comments from our friends from Sierra Leone and from Senegal. One about the localization of content. I've been young for a long time now. And when I started being young, we looked at content in a way. There was a method, a dynamic of looking for content. You brought an insight of an absolutely different way of looking for and producing content. Generational habits matter a lot here. When we look at the way of producing content for this generation, it might not be a good idea to look at the way the past generation produced and used its content. The insightful is perfect in this way. Another problem that was pointed out concerning the participation is that I acknowledge and I recognize the tremendous efforts that institutions are putting in translating sessions into more than one language. It's already less tragic to have 6 languages and Portuguese at ICANN. Not that Portuguese is not a language, right? 7 languages at ICANN.
Yes.
And also to acknowledge not only the pre-Columbian from the historical perspective, but the Guarani, the Nhangatu in Brazil, other languages in Latin America. But the thing is, the work in internet governance is not on site. The work in internet governance is intersessional by nature. It happens between sessions. And then there is a problem, because if we do have an effort for translation in the sessions when we are together, it's much harder. The effort is much higher to do it in an intersessional way. So at this moment, if you're not English, then you're out. There is an attempt to include on-site, but if you don't know English, then you're out of the intersessional work. And I was checking out the Twitter feed here for the session, and I was a little bit worried because everything that was tweeted in my last intervention was very negative, very precise. Very precise. It is exactly what I said, but it makes me look very pessimistic. So I'd like to give it another drive to end. Disagreeing a little bit with my friend panelist, that the multi-stakeholder level of the implementation of the multi-stakeholder governance is not yet there. I cannot disagree. There's no evidence to make me disagree. But I'd like to see that in our time, civil society already has a much higher voice than it used to have 20 or 30 years ago. It's far from what we need, but it's still far better than what we had. And we're preparing, for example, I understand your challenge. Catherine and I have been discussing about offering short videos of internet governance for Latin America. We can do it in Portuguese. We can cover Portuguese, English, French, and Spanish, although we can't cover all of them. But in Africa, you would have a much larger challenge than that. To overturn the pessimistic note that I left in my last intervention, I would leave you with this one.
Let me tell you, you made my day with one of your sentences. I've been young for a long time. I love it. Please, I hope I don't have to pay copyright for that, because I will keep
I'm a free
on using
culture
it.
kind of guy.
I've been young for a long time. I love that. Oh my God. Catherine, you want to add something now?
Well, just as for the dialects, and thank you for acknowledging the Quechua, the Aymara, and of course all these pre-Columbian languages and dialects that we have in Latin America. I have to say that I have recently learned about how in Peru, I have a colleague from the University of Católica that is using computational technology. So he had created a research group by which they are now processing all these dialects with the goal or the aim to later on get these persons, these communities, access to the digital economy. So he has started with this, and is crowdsourced. So that brings me to the point of we can crowdsource, the understanding of internet governance, and those little steps that may look very challenging indeed, because it's not only Africa that has many, many dialects, but also if we look at the Quechua itself, which is one of the dialects within the indigenous region, has different variations. So the Quechua they speak in, for instance, the Andes of Peru is different than the Quechua they speak in Bolivia, and so on and so forth. So initiatives like these ones, where you combine technology for good and crowdsourcing this amongst the communities, I think I may have also a positive vote for this, and I think it's important to share that as well.
Thank you very much. Other colleagues want to add something at this point? Comments from the floor? From the audience, sorry. I want to share experience I made with one of group of students I had once. I used to teach in the diplomacy career of Argentina. And one thing that sometimes we do with our students is that they have to write reports. Before I started to work with them, the reports were made in paper, and I kept the paper, I put a note, review them, and that's it. So I thought about those contents were very interesting, some of them, because they had to be related with issues from Argentina or Latin America in relation with external relationships and international commerce. So I thought, why not putting them into Wikipedia? So the project came from doing a paper, working a paper, and the obligation was to do it in Wikipedia. And before publishing it, it was before reviewed by the teachers. So the major issue was it has to be written in Spanish, because one thing that we realized was that the content in Spanish in Wikipedia is not as large as you can imagine, because the Spanish-speaking population is quite large, but you could have more content perhaps in German, that the population is less that in Spanish than Spanish or Portuguese. So the idea was to enhance the content in Spanish. And they were so happy that their work was published for the general public to access, for the general community. It was very successful. Unfortunately, some authorities didn't like that in the long term, so we did that for several years. So, and the articles are there and have been updated since then. But it was not easy to keep on doing that with time. But perhaps if we at the university, thinking about stakeholders, I'm thinking about universities that we usually produce content or produce reports or papers, if we can have them online with the corresponding licensing, which is Creative Commons or whatever it is, I'm not an expert in that field, but that has to be taken in account as well. If the content is available for the general public online, that makes it much more valuable. And I like Wikipedia a lot. I think it's a valuable very, very useful as ICANN Wiki. It's a very valuable tool. We have some minutes left. We have more comments from our colleagues. Jennifer, yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Olga, very much for giving me the floor again. I thought I might provide just a little bit of insight from the technical community. I think that might be quite interesting here because .Asia is considered part of the technical community because we are a registry. So maybe answering the question you had in giving us the second one about how different stakeholders can contribute to the internet governance model. I feel like a lot of people think the technical community, you can involve them in the, the technical capabilities, the infrastructure, and maybe implementation of certain policies. But it's actually really very important to include all stakeholders across, civil society, governments, business, academia, and the technical community throughout the entire policy development process, from scoping to drafting to refining, public consultation, and also implementation. Because if you have all these policy concerns, you'll be able to best find a multifaceted and multi-stakeholder solution if you include everybody at the table. Now, I don't disagree with what my colleague Claudio and also the colleague from Sierra Leone and Senegal who said that it may not be the perfect or ideal way we think about if you think about the multi-stakeholder model, but this is something that hopefully we can refine and make better and improve upon. Another thing that I wanted to highlight, because we didn't really talk about it here, and maybe just throw this idea out to the people here in the room, is the idea of internet governance being a broad and a narrow approach. Maybe the narrow approach would be talking about governance of the infrastructure, the governance of the internet. And then you're talking about the more broader approach when you're talking about internet governance on the internet. So you're talking about something that's more. Maybe rights come into play, policy decisions come into play, and maybe, there's political considerations as well. So I just want to say that this development process really needs to be holistic and include everybody at the table from beginning to end, so we can actually find a solution that best fits everybody. Not just maybe put the, for example, the technical community at the very end when you have to deploy, and not include the policy and civil rights concerns, which, is also extremely important in this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. You want to add something, Delilah?
Are we wrapping up?
We have like 10 minutes. Do you have more comments?
I have
positive comments, not
positive
negative?
one. No. It's the end of the day. I don't want to look bad from now on. So one 30-second update, a very positive one, Olga. As a result, not only, of course, but as a result of these dialogues that we're holding in this multi-stakeholder spaces, there has been, from last year to this one, an initiative which was carried, and I want to acknowledge the contribution and the effort of Brazil with CGI, but also with Marta Medeiros and Ana Neves from the Portuguese branches. And of course, I am sure that their involvement, and it's my sin not to acknowledge personally the involvement of other Portuguese-speaking countries, but there are absolutely involvement of them. We're organizing a seed group to organize from May to June 2018 an internet governance forum for the Portuguese-speaking countries as a community, right? So this is a very positive comment. That's going to make me look a little bit better than the pessimistic that I read on Twitter. And it's definitely, Olga, I credit this not only, but also to the space you're giving to this discussion in the IGF. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. And before I give the floor to Delilah, I think that the Portuguese-speaking, I love Portuguese as a language. I love it very much, and I try to speak as much as I can. But you have a really challenge because you are spread all over the world. It is not usually the issue with languages. For example, Spanish-speaking people were mainly Latin America and Spain, or Americas and Spain, but you are spread all over the world. That brings another challenge of distance.
Absolutely.
Thanks to internet, everything is closed now. And give the floor to Delilah.
So I would like just for for the conclusion to highlight the work of many actors in the ICANN, in the IGF about the diversity, to give you an example of a concrete action. Within the ICANN, we try to underline the necessity of having some groups or structure independent, a long-term structure to implement a policy of diversity. The proposition is called Office of Diversity, but we can give it another title. But just to underline that what is important is to have a long-term policy of diversity. We cannot only make, so we need translation, we need someone in this group because he is African or from Latin American. I think to have something coherent and the continuity of diversity policy, we need a structure, we need a strategy, something very voluntary. And if you want to see your proposition, it is in the ICANN website concerning the work stream 2. And the Office of Diversity is one of these objectives, to put something a long term, to have a long-term strategy on diversity. Thank you.
I would like to, I have summarized the main points that have been raised today. Diversity indicators, that would be very, very interesting. Diversity of decision-making environment. An office for diversity and inclusion within ICANN and perhaps within other organizations.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? Use of case studies which students are familiar with. That's from Catherine, in their country, in their community, something that is relevant for them, what you understand better and what impacts you directly will be of your interest, and you will be much into it and will produce the document and use the language of your own. It's important at least to have the abstracts translated. That gives the idea of what is the content of the full document. If the full document is not available in other languages, at least you have an abstract. Oh, it's so difficult, abstract of it. Invest in young people. I love that. Young forever. How was it? I've been young for many years. I love that. That made my day.
I'm not tired yet.
No, me neither. Content needs to be in simple language, plain, so everyone can understand it. Targeted to the audience. If it's for young, targeted to young people. If it's for the technical community, that they can understand and don't get bored because it's so simple. Or if it's for lawyers and instead of for governments. Find fun, innovative ways, like what ICANN Wiki does with the caricatures. Create content about issues of relevance to the communities of the people. Translation only in the way that others understand. The diversity goes at a different speed than the internet. I love that also. It's like the policy. How you manage when there are many languages, the challenge of having several, not only languages, but dialects in vast regions. How can we have that in mind? Official languages should be addressed in the global fora, as you rightly mentioned. IDNs and local content for Africa is really challenging, not only for Africa, must be also for Asia. 2,000 languages in Africa, that's something. Encourage young people to participate, as our colleague from the youth told us. I love the WhatsApp messages and the WhatsApp videos. That's a very innovative way of sending the content. Capacity building, that's very important to highlight. Empower people to interact in internet governance. Not only give the content, help them. That it takes time, but it's worth the effort. And our colleague told us about 3 proposals to reach the public, ways to enable meaningful participation, create frameworks that allow these organizations to find the people to do that, and channels of communications to reach a larger public. The importance to intersessional work. It's not only in the meetings, but it's in between meetings. Many things happen then. The value of crowdsourcing. We may agree that internet governance and multi-stakeholder is not perfect, but we can improve it. This is why we are talking today. And I would like to share one last comment. we have to develop a diversity side and a gender balance side. What I've learned with time, and I learned that from a colleague from Germany who is not among us anymore, unfortunately. She told me, every time you look at something, try to develop the side and analyze it. This is a very diverse room. We have people from all over the world here. So if I look at this room with the diversity side, I see diversity. If you look at a panel and there are men, you can say easily that it's from a gender balance side, it is not. So try to develop that. And when you see that there could be value adding other panelists, other colleagues into the group, just propose that. Maybe you have a no as an answer, maybe you have a yes. Maybe if you propose a translation, they say, I don't have the resources, maybe you find someone that can help. So if we develop this intention, maybe we help this imperfect but dynamic model enhance a little bit more every day.
And that's why we are today 4 men and 4 women in the panel.
Thank you very much. If you're interested in the South School of Internet Governance, it's a propaganda. We have fellowships for all the students. Go to our website, gobernanzainternet.org, or find me, Olga Cavalli, in social networks. And there's the call for applications for fellowship is open now for young people. We are all young forever, like Claudia said. So we have no age limit. Yeah, we have about 200 fellowships for the next one, which is at the end of April.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much to you. Thank you. Yes. We'll take a photo. This team, Jennifer, come to the photo.
Here.
On va prendre une photo.
Here.
Don't move. I love it. Forever, John.
Not this too again.
She can't. She's in the same place with us every time.
This one, maybe.
They're going to say,
Yeah. Frédéric will take the photo.
very good.